All right, folks, welcome back to the channel and to another episode of FAQ, where I answer your frequently asked questions related to hickory golf. This week's episode is a timely one in that I'm recording it the day after Thanksgiving, and here on Long Island and in most of the northern climes of the United States, the weather's getting colder, we're moving into winter, and the question is, how cold is too cold to play your wood-shafted golf clubs? It's obviously a question I get every season, and usually just email responses to people, but figured this would be the best way to kind of cover all the bases, or at least my experience with cold weather and hickory clubs. And so I want to go over a little bit of the history of playing golf in winter, and then talk about practical things you can do during the winter to play or not play your hickory shafted golf clubs. So let's talk about the history first. Obviously, in Scotland, they played golf year round, and there's plenty of documentation of people playing in cold conditions. But I don't think that the weather actually got as cold in Scotland, or gets as cold in Scotland as it does here in the northern United States. Basically, in Scotland, you'd play year round, and even in the snow. I actually have right here a 1920s era Colonel ball that's red. And this would have been a ball you use when you were playing in snow. Obviously, not a lot of inches of snow, but dusting of snow, or at least enough snow on the ground that a white ball would be hard to find. So they came up with a red ball to play in those conditions. The interesting thing to me, though, surprising thing even, is that there's actually documentation of people playing golf here in the U.S. in the northern climate well into the winter. And pretty cool thing you can find online, if you go to Google Books, you can find old issues of Golf, which was the early American golf magazine published right before the turn of the century. And it's all free. You can download them to your iPad even. I have them here on mine. And I just wanted to highlight a couple things as I'll show you these too as I'm talking. But this is the February 1898 edition. And in the editor's notebook, they kind of go over the events that have been happening over the previous month to give you results. And in this account, it says, on New Year's Day, the pros had a great winning at the Ocean County Hunt and Country Club, which is now current day or modern day Lakewood Country Club in New Jersey. And it goes on to say, but the ground was so frostbound and the wind so keen that accurate scoring was impossible. The Fitzjohn brothers landed first and second money. So obviously, January 1st in New Jersey, that's not a warm time of year. The ground here was frozen, made scoring difficult, but they played golf nonetheless. Another thing, actually right above that note, I think is pretty cool. And this is kind of a sidebar, but it says, golf gymnasiums are distinctly an American institution, though indoor instruction is not entirely confined to this continent. At Carnegie Hall, lessons are given every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday by Thomas Bendelow, and they are remarkably well attended. I think that's pretty cool. Tom Bendelow was doing golf lessons at Carnegie Hall. But anyway, other counts here that I wanted to mention, if I can find them in my... I'll just show these as I'm talking, but there are other accounts here of people playing golf in New Jersey and New York in the middle of winter. So obviously, cold weather did not stop them from playing back in the day. And, it does beg the question, were they breaking shafts when they were playing in those kinds of conditions? I imagine some guys probably were, but I also think that the wood in their shafts was probably stronger than the same club 120 years later. And to better explain that, or my position on that, and this is an opinion of mine, I might be wrong, and woodworkers certainly can chime in and say that I'm wrong about this. I welcome that. But my hypothesis is that when they were playing these clubs back in 1898, the wood was stronger then and a little bit more flexible and could withstand maybe the brunt of hitting frozen turf a little bit better than that same shaft in that same club 120 years later, when it was probably stored in an attic or a garage for 60 years, dried out, just wasn't maintained properly, and then somebody tries to play that club today and breaks the shaft on, in cold weather. So there's that aspect of it, and I think that's just kind of an umbrella way of me saying that if you're playing with authentic wood-shafted golf clubs, you're playing with clubs that are at least 100 years old in a lot of instances, And those clubs are always going to be at risk of breaking no matter what the weather is or the turf conditions are. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer would be, what kind of turf conditions would you expect to break a club in more so than others? And obviously, when the weather gets colder, the golf course will freeze, and you'll know that when you get up to the tee box and you try to put your tee in the ground. If it doesn't go in very easily, then you know that the rest of the fairway is going to be pretty much the same. And that's fun if you like days where you can just roll the ball out a long ways. But if you're a digger and you take divots, then the chances are higher that in that particular round you might break a shaft because you're making contact with frozen ground. I would equate it to going to a driving range with your wood shafted clubs and hitting off of a very thin mat on top of concrete. So I think when it comes to cold weather, that's the biggest concern, is that if the ground is frozen and you're using your wood shafted golf clubs and you're making turf contact, there's a higher probability that you'll break a shaft because of that. As far as the air temperature is concerned, I don't really worry about it too much. In fact, this past week here on Long Island at my home course, Port Jefferson Country Club, I just played in conditions where the air temperature was 37 degrees when I teed off. There was a wind out of the northwest at about 20 miles an hour, so the wind chill was in the mid-20s, and I didn't have any issues whatsoever with my clubs. I'm also a sweeper, so I wasn't taking any divots, and my course isn't frozen yet. But air temperature doesn't bother my clubs. I generally keep them upstairs in my house, so they're in a climate-controlled environment in the first place. Obviously, never keep your golf clubs, your hickory clubs, in your car, or that goes for cold weather or warm weather. Just don't keep them in your car, period. Take them in, put them someplace where you would be comfortable temperature-wise. So that's the office upstairs. I don't leave them down in the basement. And then I try to properly condition the shafts on a regular basis just to make sure they're getting as much moisture as they can, and they're staying conditioned. But air temperature has never been an issue for me. I'll play in conditions that most people wouldn't play in because they're physically uncomfortable in because of the weather. But yeah, I don't worry about that. Now, one thing I will say about that is if you have a wood with a fancy face insert that's made out of celluloid or plastic, you might want to reconsider using that club in colder weather, because the colder the temperatures, the more brittle that material might become, and contact with the ball that day might mess it up. So basically, my rule of thumb is if I can't get the tee in the ground, then I don't play my wood shafted clubs. And in lieu of playing wood shafted clubs, I use these guys, if I can keep them from falling over. This is a set of early 1940 McGregor Ben Hogan 1322s, the Ben Hogan Texan line. And what I like about these clubs, first of all, they're Pyratone, so it's a early kind of coating over steel shaft to make them look like wood. But the weight of these clubs is very similar to the weight of my wood shafted clubs. So the thing that a lot of people end up doing is they just switch to their modern clubs when it gets cold, and then they go back to the wood shafted clubs in the spring. And I can't make that transition that easily. I think it's the weight difference. I get used to the swing dynamics and the weight dynamics of my wood shafted clubs, and when I go to my much lighter modern clubs, it throws me off. So I like having kind of this Pyratone set, which matches pretty closely to the overall weight of my wood shafted clubs and maintains my familiarity with the swing dynamics, so that when I go back to the wood shafted clubs in the spring, it's not that much of a difference. And I just take a short set of these out. So I've got a 2-iron, a 5-iron, and a 7-iron, and obviously a putter. And one thing I'll say is you might want to continue using your wood shafted brassy, since you're hitting that off of a tee, as long as it doesn't have an insert. But I also, I like trying different clubs. So I like using this Spalding Autograph Bobby Jones model, which is also an early Pyratone, early steel shaft. And again, has the weight and dynamics of the wood shafted clubs that I'm familiar with. So that's what I do. When the ground is frozen, I stop playing my wood shafted clubs and I move to the Pyratones. Another great thing about these Pyratones is that in the spring and summer, any time of year, if you want to take one of those clubs out with you to the driving range before a round, you can kind of loosen up with that and then go to your wood shafted clubs for the regular round. So anyway, there's a definite reason to have some pyrotones around, and I also think in the future they're going to become collectible in their own right, so may as well start now while they're cheap. The other thing I'll talk about real quick is, and this is related to air temperature, a lot of guys will switch the ball they use when it gets colder so that they get more distance, and you do that by using a even lower compression ball than you normally would. So I use the Titleist True Feel during warm weather, and I'll consider using the Callaway Super Soft or Wilson Duo Soft when it gets really cold. This round that I just mentioned earlier this week, where it was in the upper 30s with a wind chill in the 20s, I used my Titleist True Feels and I was fine. I don't think I'll probably do that transition I used to do to a softer ball because I like the kind of mid 50 range, low 60 range of compression that the Titleist True Feel has, and I don't feel like I need to go all the way down to the 30 or 40 range that the Callaway Super Soft and Wilson Duo Soft have. But some guys like to do that. The physics of that, basically, if it doesn't take as much force to compress the ball, it's going to go further, and it's easier to do that in colder weather. The ball is going to be harder generally because of the air temperature, but if it's a softer core or in a lower compression ball, it'll be quicker to spring off the face than a higher compression ball would. Also, that said, some guys just don't change their ball at all, and they use the same ball all the time, and they don't notice a difference. So, that's just kind of a preference, but it is something that people do. So if you're losing some distance off the tee or with your shots and everything else seems equal, try using a lower compression ball in colder weather, and you might get those yards back. I think that pretty much covers what I wanted to talk about with this question. It's pretty straightforward. As far as I'm concerned, if the ground is frozen, don't use your hickory shafted clubs, move on to pyrotones. But if the ground isn't frozen and the air is just cool or cold, I think you can still get by using your wood shafted clubs. If you've had any experiences other than mine, please feel free to share those in the comments. Let's get a conversation going about different preferences and different things that people do to adjust to colder weather. I love playing in colder weather, actually. Some of my favorite hickory clothes are nice wool knickers and wool sweaters, and I really enjoy playing in cold weather. I wish I could do it more often, but the ground does freeze probably late, mid-December around here, maybe even earlier December, depending on the season. And the courses do stay open year-round here on Long Island, so I'm going to be able to golf throughout the winter, which is something that I couldn't do as easy when we lived in Connecticut. But I am going to make that transition to pyrotones as soon as I can't get my tee in the ground. All right, thanks folks for watching. Hope this helped. Feel free to ask any other questions that you want to see answered in these videos in the comments below or by email. And until next time, take care.